Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Reclaiming the Power of Public Media, which is a conversation in this moment of increasing commercialization of our field. Hello, good morning. Is more important than ever. Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Reclaiming the Power of Public. Sorry about that. I am Maggie Bowman with the IDA. And I am a cisgendered white woman with longish dark brown hair sitting in my living room, joining you from the ancestral land of the Potawatomi people, sometimes known as Chicago. Before we get started, I just want to offer a special word of thanks to our sponsor for this session and a longtime partner of our work at IDA, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. In particular, I want to thank Catherine Washington at CPB, who has been a real thought partner and friend to all of us at IDA throughout the planning and the creation of Getting Real. At the end of the session, if you could please complete the poll to give us feedback on what you thought of it, that would be great. And as a reminder, tonight's screening of Through the Night, which is coming to a public television screen near you soon, will be co-presented with the Camden International Film Festival. And information about how to reserve your free ticket for that are on the schedule and in your email inbox. And now I'd like to hand it over to our session moderator, who will introduce the panel, and a longtime champion of public media, Pat Aufderheide.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you to CPB and to Catherine Washington at CPB for sponsoring this panel. I am a cisgendered white woman with short reddish hair, and I am in my living room, and I am wearing my ITVS swag because I am a ITVS board member. But if it gets too hot, I'm going to have to unzip it, and then you will be able to see my 1619 t-shirt. I am on Piscataway land in the DC area, and it is my great pleasure to introduce my panelists here with me today. We have Larry Irving with us in spirit, but not in reality. Larry was a board member with me at ITVS some time ago, and he is a PBS board member and a great champion of public TV. He was a great champion of public TV when when ITVS was created, and he was senior counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives. So we are going to carry his spirit into this conversation today. And before I give an introduction to this panel, excuse me, I'm just checking the chat. I'd like to say, first of all, that movie Through the Night is amazing. You should definitely watch it. Second, we put a question into the Hop-In chat to ask you why you decided, of everything you could have done with your time this afternoon or this morning, why you decided to be with us. And we'd like to know that so that we can address your concerns as we go along. Okay, now let me introduce you to the brilliant people that I have with me today. Each one of them we asked to be with us because they are part of a movement of organizing of the documentary film community that is really like nothing we have seen in the last 20 years. Okay, first I'm going to introduce you to Bao Nguyen, who is a Vietnamese-American filmmaker. He is in many places. Sometimes he's in Saigon, sometimes he's in Los Angeles. He is a member of ADOX, and he's a recent Firelight Fellow, and he has a film called Be Water that debuted at Sundance this year. Bao, can you join us?
Hi, everyone. Hi. Hi, Pat.
And next, I'd like to introduce you to Monica Navarro. Monica is the Senior Director of Artist Programs at Firelight Media, and she's also a filmmaker. She produced the ITVS-funded feature documentary, Love in the Time of Fentanyl. Thank you for joining us today, Monica.
Thanks, Pat.
And I think all of you know what Firelight is. I should have explained, but I'm sure Bao will more. ADOX is an organization of Asian American documentary filmmakers. Firelight, of course, is the media arts organization that has nurtured and co-produced many films by BIPOC makers, and continues to do an outstanding job. Next, I'm going to have Bawin Suchak join us. Bawin is an educator and a filmmaker, and he is the co-founder of two really important organizations, Youth FX and NextDoc. And he's currently directing and co-directing and producing a film called Out of the Muck, and it has ITVS support as well as Sundance and Just Films. So these are three people who have a real understanding and appreciation for public television, and are also leaders in organizations that are organizing the field itself. And I am moved to know that I'm in your company. I was part of a previous era of activism and organizing in the 70s that in which filmmakers and public television came into a really dynamic and productive relationship. And that relationship culminated in 1988 with the creation of the Independent Television Service, which is a real, it's an example of a real partnership between filmmakers and public television. It is, of course, the largest production company making social issue documentaries in America today, and it has filmmakers integrated into the decision-making process. It has filmmakers on the board of directors, and it has diversity. It has had diversity at its core for more than 20 years. And if I could have the slide that I asked to you guys to put up, fantastic. I don't suppose it can get any bigger than that, can it? Possibly not. All right. I just wanted to, if you can focus that closely, you can see. Oh, that's so much better. That's a little too much. A little bit less there. Oh, perfect. You guys are amazing. Okay. So this is a slide that summarizes some of the diversity stats of ITVS. You can see that the board of directors is more than 3/4 BIPOC, and it's almost half Black. The senior management is 43% BIPOC and 21% Black. The staff is 58% BIPOC, 12% Black. The curatorial team is two-thirds BIPOC and more than 1/4 Black, and funded producers are more than 2/3 BIPOC and 1/4 Black. So that is a real example of what can happen when diversity is prioritized.
I think we lost your sound, Pat. You were saying when diversity was I think you were going to say prioritize.
I think we lost Pat.
You might have lost Pat.
Am I back?
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome back.
So the question is, if we overrepresent BIPOC people on the board, on the staff, among filmmakers, does that mean that we are unrepresentative in the stories that we tell? Actually, the Center for Media and Social Impact, which I founded and which Katie Borum-Chattu now runs, we did a study to ask exactly that question. And what we found is that there is a very close correlation between the issues that Americans believe are important in Gallup polls and the issues that are dealt with in ITVS films. As well, there's a broad geographic representation of 33 states, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, in these stories. And these are the pressing issues that people care about in America today. So we actually don't see unrepresentation of American realities as a result of prioritizing diversity. In fact, what we're seeing is the opposite. But what I'm interested in, because in my generation, public broadcasting was terrifically important. And it was important not only because it's really important to have a public spot, but because at the time, the economics of broadcasting were entirely different. And public broadcasting was the place. If you were an independent producer, you could go. And one of the things I would like to know from you is, as you are organizing producers, as you're organizing filmmakers, what do your organizations see as your relationship to public broadcasting? And why don't we just start with you, Bao?
Sure. So just so I go by the he, him pronouns, and I'm currently residing in the Tongva lands in the city of Los Angeles. I'm an Asian cisgendered male in my 30s with short black hair, a black beard, navy blue sweater, and sitting in a room with gray and yellow walls. There's a white door, brown bookshelf, and yellow cabinets are behind me. With ADOC, I'm so fortunate and grateful to be part of an organization as a member that really supports Asian American documentary filmmakers, and not just Asian American, but Asian documentary filmmakers around the world. And I think with ADOC, we saw a lot of us came from the public broadcasting system, or just in terms of our early films being funded through that system, especially the first few films that I worked on. One was with Leo Chang, and that was Mr. Gao Goes to Washington. And I kind of got to understand the ecosystem of public broadcasting through working on that film, and also working with people like Grace Lee and learning from them and really standing on their shoulders. And I would say ADOC, and I think many of my fellow panelists can also talk about, came from the idea of being more fluid and having to be nimble around sort of the structures and rigidity that sometimes public broadcasting can set up and create for us filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers and underrepresented filmmakers. I think our relationship now is trying to find the best possible avenues and venues for our stories to be told in ways that are representative of us, again, as marginalized and underrepresented filmmakers. And we don't just stand on the shoulders of fellow filmmakers, but we do stand on the shoulders of the public broadcasting system. So for me, this panel is an opportunity to show my appreciation and gratitude, but also talk about the reckoning that has to happen in the public broadcasting system in many ways for us to be filmmakers who are able to create a future for it and kind of continue building on the value of the public broadcasting system in this sort of new context, this new world that we're living in.
So just to push you a second, Bao, two things that you think are involved in this reckoning.
I can name three things. So I think there needs to be structural changes, there needs to be cultural changes, and there needs to be personnel changes. And those are just three kind of overarching changes I think can help push things forward in many ways.
So just pick one of those and make it real to us. So, like, say there's personnel changes. What are you asking for?
So, I mean, you brought up that slide of ITVS and how it is kind of a very inclusive organization, very inclusive place. But I think the public broadcasting system is not just ITVS, right? There's many different aspects of it. And going on, watching another panel earlier this week, I saw someone comment that, they worked as a programmer in the within PBS, and they imagine themselves as one of the only Asian programmers in the system. And I think that says a lot about where things need to change, right? Because it's not just the people creating content, but obviously the people who are curating the content as well.
Thank you. And I think we want to pick that up as well, but I want to get the voices of the other panelists in before we go too much further as well. Monica, I'm turning to you.
Thanks, Pat. And yeah, I want to get to your question, but build off of what Bao said. Because I look at that slide from ITVS that they put out this summer, and I would like to see all of the entities across public media be that transparent about what their board, what their senior staff, what their curators, what their staff looks like. And even with ITVS, that is one of the few places I work that actually looks like the country. World Channel also, I lurked there and I felt like I see myself, I see us. I don't see that everywhere in public media. There is a discrepancy between senior staff, and that is something we've seen throughout. You'll see a lot of BIPOC folks in junior or support positions, not at the leadership level, not at the senior level, and the curation, you know, is, as Bao was saying, like, you can't separate it. It's all interrelated. That's why, like, for there to be these real cultural shifts and systemic changes is about who's making the decision, who is holding the power. So I don't think you can extrapolate one, but I would love to see that transparency throughout, because I think and this is something as I've been listening these past couple days and noting where folks are commenting as it relates to public media, I'm hearing this again and again, that we need a reckoning. And we need to really address these issues. So it's not just the organizations like ITVS, Old New Multicultural Alliance, or Firelight that are designed, and it's in our blood and in our DNA to be representative of the public and to highlight those voices who have been left out, who've been overlooked, who've been erased, and to look even within those groups, those dominant groups, like who within the dominant group has not been included. So I think that's like built into the work that these organizations do. And, but just to like add that, I think that, I hope that ITVS is like, you know, that's the lead, that more folks would get behind that so that we can hold these institutions accountable. And then in your question of like, what does Firelight see as our relationship to public media? I think we have a long, strong, healthy, like wonderful relationship. I mean, you reminded me of when I worked at ITVS and I was working on the slides for the incoming producers. And it was like to think of yourself as a public television producer and not a filmmaker. And the filmmaker was Spike Lee, you know, an auteur who really is like, you know, with his vision. There's not some things to unpack there. But then the picture of the filmmaker was Ken Burns. And I'm like, no, I think we are beyond like having Ken Burns being like who we hold ourselves up to. And I put Stanley in there because I'm like, we should aspire to be like Stanley, of like build a house that Stanley and Mark built with Firelight Films and Media, and then how they've opened the door. So I think, you know, to see that Firelight, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and that's when they created Firelight Films. We're celebrating 10 years of the Doc Lab, you know, and many of our filmmakers that have been through the Doc Lab have produced for public media. So I think not only has there been this like, you know, relationship of it's where Stanley's produced his work, but we've also like have the investment and the acknowledgement from public media that the work that we are nurturing in the Doc Lab and our other programs then go to produce for public media, because that is the place where there is, you know, there is the funding, there is the strands that will support this work. I think the deepest catalog of independent film and by BIPOC filmmakers is in public media. I don't think we own it enough. I mean, if you look at the pool of everyone who's ever produced for public media, like it's impressive, but I don't think we own that space.
Who's we?
Public media. I don't think public media owns the space of like the deep, incredible catalog they have of independent filmmakers who've come through, many through ITVS or the Multicultural Alliance. And now Firelight is part of that too. When you see, you know, like Pete Nix and Don Porter and Baunuin, you know, and many other folks at Buffalo that have all been part of the Doc Lab that have produced for public media and beyond. So, you know, I just think it's like an investment in amplifying and centering those stories not just investing them and amplifying and centering like the incredible work that the Multicultural Alliance does. Like, I worry about how much independents still are marginalized within the system with all the incredible work of all these institutions that work for them. I think that independent voices still actually get marginalized within the system itself in terms of like primetime programming, marketing dollars, really building audience and talking about who that audience is and nurturing that audience and back to the programming.
So we have, if I can pick out one of the things that you said, we have celebrities in this story. We have people like Stanley Nelson. We have people like Michelle Stephenson. We have people like Marcia Smith. We have Henry Hampton, God rest his soul. And we have people who indelibly changed the form of documentary itself with their creativity within public broadcasting, and that those should be heroes that public broadcasting celebrates. Is that?
Yeah, but we also have like a newer generation. We have Cecilia Alderando, we have Ramel Ross, we have Brett Story, like some really visionary filmmakers. Ramona Diaz, who all of her incredible work has been on public media, like, and more. Like, there's younger ones too.
Lyric Cabral, yeah,
Lyric Cabral,
that doesn't stop.
It doesn't, yeah. But I think that there's still work to actually center, lift up, and put like the support behind the independents the way they do behind Masterpiece, I guess.
So I have some follow-up questions for you, Monica, but I want to save them until we get to Bawin Suchak. I have to say Bawin Suchak every single time I say Bawin's name, because otherwise his name sounds too much like Bawin's full name. So Bawin Suchak, talk to us about your organizations and how you see a relationship in the people that you're working with or not with public broadcasting.
Mm-hmm. Hey, well, thank you. It's great to be on this panel with everybody here. Some really dynamic voices in this conversation. And I feel like, I wanted to start by just, identifying myself. My name is Bawin. I'm actually right now, typically I'll be in upstate New York, but I'm on the traditional lands of the Seminole and the Tequesta people down in southern Florida near what is now called Pahokee, working on a film that's actually ITVS supported. So very familiar with ITVS and their incredible work. I am a cisgendered male, go by he, him pronouns. I'm wearing a green Youth FX shirt and I'm in a very spare room. And I have short, dark black hair with a bunch of grays coming in. And I think, this conversation is really important right now. I think because there is a complete, sort of transformation of everything going on, which I think is long, long overdue and is sort of building off of, legacies and generations of people trying to create revolutions in many different ways. And I think, we can't underestimate the power of the stories that we tell. And I think we also exist. And by we, I mean us in this panel, us on the chat, people who are watching and getting real. We exist in a sort of bubble within the larger public media ecosystem because our main connections are through ITVS, Independent Lens, MDocs, World Channel, these incredible institutions in the minority consortia that are supporting this work and really pushing. And I think that the entire PBS CPB system could really learn from the modeling of folks at ITVS and those institutions because they're leading the way. And I think furthermore, what's really incredible is that ITVS is very much in all those institutions actually are in very direct relationship and communication with folks like Firelight and NextDoc and other incredible, networks like Brown Girls Doc Mafia and ADOCs. And we're all sort of sitting at the same tables having these conversations. And what I love is that you're starting to see these crossovers because I think in essence, like we should all be learning from the organizations that are doing the grassroots work, which is, people on this panel and people that are working hard to sort of bring up different, not only just like styles and modes of producing documentaries and aesthetical, approaches, but I think also a lot more daring in the way that those films are impacting the larger world by really thinking differently and dynamically about impact and about community-based, engagement and things like that. So I think all those conversations are so important because at the end of the day, public media is funded by us, and CPB, at least the last time I checked, is it's like 1/100th of a percentage of the federal budget. Yet, it gets this amplified sort of, space in like what's going to get cut because CPB, made a documentary about, someone who was transgendered, or there's too many documentaries about racial injustice. And, so we're living in a time of real dystopian sort of, political spheres where you can't really make sense of a lot of it because there's so much behind the scenes that are sort of controlling where money flows. So what I think is really important right now is to think about the power of public media in the context of transparency and accountability, and how does that flow down to like the public stations around the country? Because we shouldn't have to only rely on federal funding for us as makers. If I'm in a community where that has a station, how is that station in communication and relationship with us? So, our local station, we have been engaged with them on some levels, but again, like they're another example of the localized PBS, entity that should be, sort of in direct relationship with media makers and its community, is predominantly white, like very, very white. And it's so when it does sort of reach out, it's this very uncomfortable sort of extractive way of saying, hey, we want to like sort of teach us like how to tell the really important stories about, communities of color, because you're Youth FX and you're a grassroots organization, rather than saying, here's the money for you to do the work because you're the ones doing the work, right? And like, how do we sort of like create ways that we can sort of partner with filmmakers and create a lot more of a dynamic reach with that public money, rather than sort of having it essentially like controlled and gatekept in every level. Like there's just this like sort of like, and I think if you think about ITVS, even in the last 3 years to sort of switch their modality of how they engage with filmmakers in the Indie Summit. And, I started when Monica was there and, doing the DDF, orientations. That's where I met people like Ursula Yang, I met Laura, and I met, connected with Grace Lee in a deeper level. And I just feel like those are the spaces where we really start to catalyze ideas, because the system is listening to the filmmakers. It's listening to the people who are actually doing the work, rather than the other way around where we're forced to sort of pigeonhole. And I think it is so long overdue to switch up, who's getting the resources and the funding. And I think to also be really, really careful about the ways that we sort of approach, systemic change in a way that it's not done from the top level, but that it's actually like listening very deeply to younger filmmakers who, so with NextDoc as a program, right now we have filmmakers who are applying for DDF. Some filmmakers have gotten DDF funding. And I think that
in case there's anybody who doesn't know what DDF is, could you explain?
Yeah, so that's the Diversity Development Fund that ITVS has, which actually comes in before you even sometimes have footage, at very early stages, to support new filmmakers to enter the pipeline, to give them this really ground level support, which is clearly where so many filmmakers have a challenge right off the bat, is launching that film. And then the last thing I'll just add that's super important to me, and this is where I push, and sort of like when the young filmmakers are grappling with whether or not they should go DDF and give up those sort of broadcast rights, because there's a lot of considerations to make there. And I say, you're not getting a grant, you're in production, co-production with ITVS. So there are all these, as you mentioned, Bao, there are some limitations and there's things you're giving up. But for me, I think the big choice is having a broad audience. And like for our film right now, Out of the Muck, it's like, part of what I see the potentials of public media is to also flatten the class divisions within our field. I mean, we can't deny that documentary, there's a massive class division that's also that we don't really talk about a lot, where, people who have access to higher levels of education, that know how to write these grants and know how to do all this sort of like grunt work, that's a lot of the behind the scenes work that happens, are not really able to access because they don't have, the tools and the networks. And so for us at NextDoc and Youth FX, we're trying to develop those younger people to have the access to the networks and teach them how to sort of play the game, but to not give up their perspective as people who are coming from the margins, who are saying, this is a story I have to tell, and it shouldn't have to be changed and reshaped and sort of made into this academic, sort of like framework in order to get funding. Like, you should be able to tell your story authentically the way you want to tell it and get support from PBS and public media at the same time. And also to say that public media is not always public. It's government media sometimes, and that's a super important distinction. So I would love to see public media funding get funneled into these collectives like ADOCS and NextDoc and Firelight and BGDM and all these incredible, undocumented filmmakers collective. Like they exist. Like, how do we funnel money into them so they can be the ones controlling the money and the production?
So you just said BGDM. Will you explain that for people who are not paying attention to acronym?
Right, Brown Girls Doc Mafia. which is a huge network of women of color who are making documentaries and all sorts of things. But I think, like, you know, I've been thinking a lot about episodic too. It's like we could be funding so much more episodic work to start, you know, and that creates more opportunities because you can have a broader production team and you can kind of, you know, anyways, there's a lot of different things to talk about. This is a good conversation, so I'm going to stop.
But
I want to jump in just so,
First,
I just
Monica,
want to
and
jump
then
in just so
Bob.
I can be. I just want to be clear that actually Firelight does receive support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and that came very organically. Seeing all the filmmakers we're supporting whose work was going to public media, and they've been able to help underwrite our doc lab as well as some really exciting new initiatives of work we've been doing with American Masters, with which actually will be released next month. 5 beautiful shorts about BIPOC artists made all by Firelight alum and filmmakers. We've been partnering with Frontline. We're in our 2nd fellowship, developing digital shorts and broadcast half hours. And, you know, this is something I've always wanted to see in public media. Like, all the independents have the talent and the ability to be producing for all these other like forms and genres. And, you know, it's taken the vision of folks like at American Masters and Rainey Aronson and Carla Boris at Frontline, and also the support of CPB for us to bridge that partnership. So Firelight can also help those filmmakers navigate those producing for those outlets. And then Groundwork has been a program we've been doing with local stations in the South and the Midwest and the U.S. territories, to start to, you know, build those connections between filmmakers, local stations, and community-based or local arts orgs. And, you know, just those are some bright lights. I would say we are, I don't know if like that will be down the road mean that some of these collectives will start to get support, but we've been able to leverage that to kind of reimagine and fast track some things that really needed to be happening for quite a while. But Val, I know you were going to jump in here.
No, I just wanted to kind of go off of on Bowen's point about just like starting from the grassroots and really building ourselves up a bit. And I think, you know, one of the, in addition to ADOC, Firelight, one of the early initiatives that really helped me understand and navigate the public broadcasting system was the CPB PBS Producers Workshop run by WGBH and Judith Vecchione, right? And that's where I met people like Christina King and Grace Lee and like Jeff Seelbach, who are, you know, really on top of, you know, their game right now. And they just have helped and brought up everyone around them. And I think because of kind of the absence of that workshop, we've had to create different avenues such as, you know, ADOC and create more initiatives through places like Firelight, right? Because not only was it really building ourselves up from the grassroots level, but it was also kind of having independent producers and filmmakers liaison and talk with member producers, local station producers, right? I think that there's such a huge void between our understanding of what like independent producers do in the public broadcasting system and what local member station producers do, and how we can really build upon that relationship and collaboration to lift up all of public media in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to encourage everybody who is in the audience here to be putting in questions into the hop-in chat. They're being digested. Maggie Bowman is synthesizing them and giving them to us. Don't hesitate, because we're going to weave your questions into the conversation that we're having. You know, one of the things that I think is so interesting about the tenor of your conversations here is that you keep talking about partnership and what independents are bringing and can bring to public broadcasting, which is a very different approach from I think a stereotype of independent filmmakers saying we should just get more funding. We should just get more funding. So you're itemizing some of the things that public broadcasting will be weaker if it doesn't have. And I wanted you to elaborate or continue on that conversational thread a little bit, if you would. And then I'm going to give you a couple of questions.
Sorry, can you clarify the question? Weaker if it doesn't have what? I don't
So things
know that I
independent
understand.
filmmakers bring to the party, other than the request for more money for independent filmmakers. What are those assets that are valuable? Certainly ITVS has benefited enormously. But ITVS would not be the vital organization it is today without the continuous input and creative demands of filmmakers. And I just want to point out that ITVS continues to be a work in progress. I say this as a member of the board. It never stops discovering that it is difficult to put diversity in the center of your organizational plan. That goes against everything of the structure of our country, which is organized toward privilege and whiteness. So it's not like we have solved the problem, but we are addressing the issue.
I think I understand the question now. I mean, I think it's really simple, actually. I think independents, and especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, like, we help uphold the mission. We are like living the mission of public media. And, I think I've had a unique career, like starting as an independent and I had a residency at a station. So I got support from local producers and was at WGBH, so a station that produces 60%, or at least then it was 60% of the content for the whole country, while also like having this incredible like local program from producers, and that residency doesn't exist anymore. And got support from ITVS, from Latino Public Broadcasting, got distributed on Independent Lens and PBS Home Video. So I kind of like from the gate, like learned a lot about all these different entities that is very hard to understand how they all work, and then have worked on the distribution side at American Documentary and at World Channel, and then have worked on the funding and artist development side at ITVS, and now, in the artist development at Firelight. And I think that wherever I was, when I was working institutionally within public media, it was just holding ourselves to the mission. And my former boss, Jim Summers, would always say, like, the mission is our foundation. And I found like a lot of clarity and intention of purpose in that. But I mean, if you look at the mission, like it says, part of it is to use media to educate, inspire, entertain, and express a diversity of perspectives. And the diversity of perspectives comes from us. And it can't just be about education and entertainment. It can, but it's also that we need those perspectives. But then those perspectives aren't just in the stories we tell. But I think someone was asking about, who is programming them in the stations, who, even with all this incredible stories coming through, who actually gets that decision of what gets showed in Alabama or El Paso or Seattle, So I think it's simple in that, like, the mission would not actually be living to its purpose without us. But where is the power imbalance? And funding is real, because I think they're also getting like a great value on the like monies per minute of like what's spent on an independent film that goes to public media versus probably what's spent on like a Nature, or I've worked on a historical series. I was appalled whenever we went over budget or over like production schedule, because I'm like, that is money that could have gone to an independent. So I also got to see like how the sausage was made working on Latino Americans. And Latino Americans, I think, only came out because Ken Burns had produced The War and was going to leave Latinx soldiers completely out of the experience of World War II till there was pushback. I don't think that WIDA would have actually like put their resources behind the Latino Americans if they had not gotten that negative pushback and advocacy from folks like Nalip to include our stories. And then that then resulted in Latino Americans. And when we were producing that 5-6 years ago, they were already in development for the Asian American stories. And like 5 hours for Asian Americans, 6 hours for Latino Americans, like our histories cannot be condensed into 6 hours over 60 years of public media. So it is like a long overdue time coming. And I both can hold that, like, I drink the Kool-Aid of public media. I believe in it. Like, it's why I've kind of spent my whole career working in it and still believe in it. But I also, like, because I believe in it so much, I also want to interrogate it and hold it to its highest purpose. So that's, to me, like the role we play. And we can be great partners. And I feel like the artists can lead the way of like where it needs to go.
I think Bao and Bawin also have good points to make here, and I can see that they're dying to make them. I just want to give you some of the things that people are asking us to address. Other people who are listening to us are concerned about the role of stations. In fact, one person was disconcertingly wrote, "I've given up. I've stopped looking to my local station for diverse content as they've given valuable real estate to infomercials and nostalgic fundraising. Local programmers still seem fully empowered to cherry pick the offerings." By the way, someone else is asking about TV Lab, which was way before your time. TV Lab was an experimental, a tiny institution within public broadcasting that existed to do experiments in making films, and it died in an earlier era. And so somebody's saying, what about that? So anyway, Bawin, who wants to go first?
I just wanted to touch on a couple of the things that were just brought up in that, because I was looking at those questions as well. And I think that, like, I think that's like a really good space to think about. And I'm going to just sort of use our localized example. And, I doubt anybody from our local WMHT station is watching, but I hope that they are, because part of what we talk about is this idea that they have resources, right? So there's a studio, there's editing labs, there's all this like access that they could potentially be providing. And I think that's the way to be thinking of it. You think about something like a TV lab, which obviously is, it's something that happened in the 70s, but I think there's so many models that we've just sort of, we don't talk about the history. And I've been saying this a lot in some of the recent conversations around transformation in our field, is that historically people have done things, that have actually like worked and have been very radical. And I think, even think about Eyes on the Prize with the partnership with Blackside. And I think like there's so many ways that we can be asking more of those local stations. I mean, I just think of the simple idea of like mentorship and sharing resources, which is really one of the cornerstones of what YouthFX is based on and NextDoc is based on, because we've asked that NextDoc to have experienced filmmakers, like, just even have conversations, include people on different like productions, and like allow people to have the opportunity who are ready to actually be in the mix. And I think if you think about a local station outside of the context of programming, these things don't take necessarily money. They just take coordination and proactivity, and to be engaged in the community in a way that's saying, how do we serve you, not just by the programming, but actually by the resources we have as an institution. And then I potentially feel like that could lead to more programming decisions that are being made, because you're now interacting with the community of filmmakers and media makers in your actual region and cities. So I think it's like, for example, WMHT serves 2 million people in this upstate New York region, but there's only a couple of programs that are actually asking filmmakers locally to engage with them, and they're very marginalized programs. Like they play at like 11 p.m. on Sunday or something, and even Independent Lens and POV have been sort of pushed to those margins. So it's like there's a lot of real estate there, television wise, like actual broadcast wise, and actually like physical space that could be given to people in public, in the community, that is being sort of underlooked. And I think also, just to touch on the fact that I didn't know that about Firelight, and that's incredible. So that means that there's a blueprint, there's a way that can happen, and it can be scaled in different ways, either up in the case of Firelight, or it can be scaled down to some of the other smaller, collective groups of filmmakers working regionally and nationally.
Yes, I think that celebrating what is working and using those models is really important. I know that I work at American University, and I've actually taken some of the learning that I have had at ITVS about putting diversity in the center of your strategic planning, and brought that to my university because it's been so successful. Bao, did I cut you off? Did you want to say something?
No. I mean, I just wanted to add, one of the things that, the public broadcasting system, having local member stations, what the value is over something like Netflix and Amazon is that they're not Netflix and Amazon aren't about community building. They don't have communities, right? They're not embedded in the communities. And PBS is, the public broadcasting system is through their local member stations. So how do we utilize that more? For me as an independent filmmaker, I gave one example of like tangible actions we could do. One is bringing back the Producers Academy. Another is maybe having a line item for impact producers at these member stations. Someone had brought this up in a focus call I had a few weeks ago with CPB, PBS, and I think that's a great idea to like, how do we work within these communities to bring those stories to them? And they know the communities better than anyone else, right? And how are we using our stories to empower these communities? And given the pandemic, I want to immerse myself in my local community so much more after this, right? Because the world is so much smaller in so many ways. And how do we use the world that's going to come after the pandemic and bring the value that PBS public broadcasting can do to rebuild this world in a better way, in a more localized way, in a more inclusive way. And I think that's something that I love to see in the future, is like how the stories, the films, the projects that we bring aboard as independent filmmakers isn't just playing for the big strands, but like, how do we curate and tailor it for the local communities? How do we bring audiences from that local community? How do we engage in events and panels, discussions, and things like that?
And if I could just flip it too, to take some of the learning we've gotten out of the pandemic and to use it to understand how we can level the playing field a little bit. When Bowen Suchak was talking about the problems of people who are not yet within the tent trying to get in there, I thought about the high costs of attending something like Getting Real, usually, and how much more accessible this format is for many people who otherwise could never afford to come. So I do think that there's some learning that goes both ways about out of the pandemic. Well, one of the things, we don't have that much time left. One of the things I wanted to address, there's a question here. How do we organize to pressure funders to test innovative forms? Paywall free, social media accessible, viral streaming content designed for underrepresented BIPOC audiences. That's a great question, but here's a question that I want to make sure we get in before anything else, because you are all dealing with new gen producers who have grown up possibly without ever turning on a television set at all. What's public television to them? What could it be to them as you're working with them in your organizations?
I want to just say that I think that's such an important question. And I want to say again, like there's been some incredible models like ITVS Future States, POV did a whole Instagram stories model platform for one of their recent projects. And I think, and again, I think the power of that is in partnerships, right? Is like, how do places like ITVS and even Frontline, I think, is trying some like digital journalism and innovation, like you said with Firelight, but I think even some newer things with like younger people in high school, college age. And, it's like there's so many right now, as Bao mentioned, due to the sort of pandemic and also like I think the Black liberation movement, people are realizing that how we're getting our information is super important, especially, and it needs to be like kind of like in a way, it needs to be a lot more faster. The turnaround has to be faster for when we get our stories out. So I want to just say that I do think it's super important. This topic right here deserves its own like 2 hour, 1 hour workshop or panel, but this right here is one of the most important things to expand on, because I do think that you're what you're doing is you're sort of marginalizing young people even further from essentially their birthright, which is the money that the funding and the resources that they're sort of are being generated on their behalf, which as they get older, it's like they have in a way, it's like I think it's important for us to think about this is our right. Like our right is to be able to tell our stories and our media and sort of reclaim and regenerate our histories, because they've been sort of stolen from us by in public media in the past too. But I think as Monica mentioned, it's like the Asian Americans documentary getting only 6 hours. It's like that's not even like, that's like a blip, right? So part of this is also like we have to reclaim the stuff because this belongs to us, and I think digital platforming of our work right now is super important. And I'm just gonna and I'm sure Monica, you have a lot to comment on that as well.
We have 8 minutes left in which to solve all of these problems.
We got this.
I'll try to keep it
You got
really concise. Yeah, I think that Frontline has been really forward-looking. I mean, they were supporting some incredible immersive work with Nani de la Peña and other like the folks that are the like visionaries for immersive media. And Frontline's unique. They own the copyright, so they can put everything on YouTube. So I think they've like been able to build that out. And I've seen World Channel do that too. I have to lift up Chris Hastings because I do, and I think I've seen that in the comments. Like Chris has been super innovative with World and just used it to incubate like a ton of ideas. And but I don't think, but he is trying to get, you know, the films out where folks are, which is online on YouTube. But I would say, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I think that there is work to do. I think I don't have enough to say station by station, but I know there are some stations that really are dedicated to developing these digital spaces and making those connections. But I think of like Kamal Sinclair's work, which hopefully someone can throw up. I put the link, Making a New Reality. Like, you know, she does talk about the immersive space and how do we look at that and what would a public commons look like with new media. And to have someone like Opiemi Olukemi at American Documentary and what she's already done and what she will do with POV Spark. Like, I think we just need to also be putting BIPOC folks like Opiemi, like Carla Boras and more. We need more. And Chris Hastings, like we need more folks like that who are at the points where they're getting to innovate and they're getting to use public media in all its form, not just broadcast. And, you know, truly start to like be a sandbox with it and fail, but, you know, try things. So I think that, but I see that shift happening. I mean, we're working briefly like on this groundwork project with a local station with UNCTV and Real South in South Carolina. And, you know, one of our like criteria was, will it serve a public media audience? And I was like, we got to unpack this question because who do we mean by a public television audience? Because I felt like that has been coded to mean like older white subscribers. And I've heard it like for the entire time I've been from various folks. And, you know, it was great. Like it was a great conversation that we had. And the older white male programmer that worked there was like, Monica's right. I agree. Like we're working for new audiences and so it was like, let's not think of it, does it serve what we think a public media audience is, but will this bring in new audiences? Will this connect to viewers who've maybe been overlooked or only get these tentpole pieces during like heritage months, you know? So
and, you know,
think
people do younger and more diverse audiences will come if you program, right? That's the Independent Lens showed that we have younger and more diverse audiences than any other program on public television. I think
you have to value them and you have to like show the continuity and keep like, you know, I'll bring up again Latino Americans. Like some of the folks on that team worked on this series Latin Music USA, and I know that they saw a bump in Latinx viewers after that then dropped off, because they didn't value that they were going to bring in this whole new audience and what else. And there probably was like things in the pipeline they could have programmed throughout. And, you know, I don't know the metrics from like what happened after Latino Americans. It'll be interesting at this year with Asian Americans. Was there a bump? Are they continuing to cultivate and value that audience that I'm sure they brought in with the Asian American series?
Bao, I think you might have the last word because I think we only have a couple of minutes left.
Well, I'll try to make it quick so everyone can have another last word. I think there's an issue of like kind of a pull versus push strategy of the past. Like there's always been this idea of pulling and attracting viewers with kind of PBS content, with, you know, valued content, prestigious. But there's nowadays, with kind of given the noise and how many different places where people can watch things, there's not enough push, right? There's not the idea of like pushing content that's already existing to new audiences. And I give like an example of like during COVID, just trying to use like the PBS app or watching PBS on a television, it was really hard for me to find the programs that I wanted to watch. And it was easier for me to just find it on Netflix, a PBS program that was licensed to Netflix. And like the idea that a PBS, you know, project, a film that was on IPBS or something, and I know this is kind of bigger than just the conversation we're having now. But like, it's seeing something that's restricted 30 days on the PBS app, but then it's not restricted at all on the Netflix app. Like, there's a big divide there, and that has to be addressed if we're going to have this conversation about expanding audiences, right?
That is a beautiful, concrete example, and I think that is going to be our last comment. But obviously, you guys are so full of really great ideas and partnership ideas. I hope that people in public television follow up with you. I want to close by saying thank you to our ASL translator, interpreters, Andrea Lust and Hope Simon, for their interpretation, and also to the National Captioning Institute for live captioning.
I guess we lost her.
You're back.
And I hope that people did a wonderful job of closing up while my internet went down. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.